Okay, mine is running. It said your Zoom is recording. Okay. Okay. Three, two, one. Okay. I had graduated Auburn University, and I was supposed to go, I had wanted to go to law school to become a civil rights attorney. And in between caught my 4 year and deciding what I was going to do, I moved back home, and it kind of like suddenly hit me how traumatic my childhood had been, because I had grown up in a very physically and emotionally abusive household with a severely alcoholic mother. And, that was all I had ever known. And just having some years away at college, being around other people and other experiences and getting to know myself and who I was, I realized how traumatic that had been for me. And somebody had mentioned that this thing called the Border Patrol was hiring, and I had never heard of the U.S. Border Patrol. But they offered me a job in San Diego. It was in the federal government, and it sounded like, I thought to myself, well, let's see this side of the law and experience this before going to law school and give myself a break. And I also knew that I was a young gay woman at that time. I was 24, and going to California from Alabama sounded like a pretty good idea. And at the time, the Border Patrol Academy was in Glencoe, Georgia. They just put me into, I was lucky that I got a single room, because back then I was a smoker. And all my roommates in this townhome, because it's an old military installation, so you have townhomes. All my housemates were immigration inspectors, and I was the only Border Patrol. And so I didn't meet anybody. I just went to sleep and then got up the next morning literally in the same clothes and went to class. And basically, it seemed like there were no women in the Border Patrol. That's the first thing I noticed. There were no instructors, because the instructors in the academy are actual Border Patrol agents who are assigned to the academy temporarily as, or they call it detailed to the academy as instructors. So they're actual agents. And it was all men. And our class only had like 6 women. But, it is law enforcement. It is supposed to be one of the toughest academies. That's what they kept telling us, toughest academies to get through. Though they never really said why. But that was kind of that was my first night there. So it wasn't much of an experience, because it was very late and very dark and stuff. So no, there's just, for me personally, it was about getting my career going, getting started. So I'm just not geared towards, I wasn't going in thinking, oh my God, there's so few women here, I'm scared, there's a lot of men here. I wasn't going into the Border Patrol Academy like that. It was just like, oh, there's few women here, that's pretty normal, I hope I pass. And the guys in my class, I was in the 288th, and I think now they're up over 1,000. It's ridiculous. But the guys were really nice. Some were from California, some were from the South. I had no inkling that anything was nefarious or weird about the academy. They just talked about honor first, and you're lucky to even be chosen to be in the Border Patrol. People who leave the Border Patrol always want to come back to the Border Patrol. It's the best job. We're the most honorable, da, 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 da. So at first it's all just kind of, welcome to the Border Patrol. They did say that they don't see that there's a difference between, and they would repeat this over and over, that there's no difference between a male agent and a female agent. Everybody does the shooting the same, everybody does the physical standards the same, your tests are the same, you have to do it in the same time, which I thought was kind of odd because not even the military does that. You know, the military will do that for their special training unit. So I'm like, what kind of deal did I just join that, you know, you have to run the mile and a half in the same time the guys do. And they kept saying, well, it's important because that's all you're going to be doing out there is running and jumping into trains and this and that. But a lot of the instructors I would say a fair amount of the instructors who were not physical training instructors were quite obese. So I found that kind of interesting, and I judged from the get-go that the physical training standards were a method of getting rid of undesirable people, or it was just an initial evaluation in the academy to decide how much you really wanted the job. But then after that, they didn't care if you got fat. So the very first inkling was when it was like the first or second night. So the female agents who were ahead of us, at the time there were at least 6 different classes, and each Border Patrol class had around 60 to 70 students in them, trainees in them. And so the women who were about to graduate from the classes who were ahead of us, and there never seemed to be any more than 2 women, came to my housemate's room and got the 6 women in my class together, and we sat on the beds and they talked to us about what we should expect. They specifically mentioned the game of smiles and explained to us what that was. The game of smiles is apparently a military game, is what they said. It came from the military. And there are a lot of ex-military in the Border Patrol. And they said that on graduation nights, some of the male instructors would get together with their favorite male trainees, and they would party. And they would hold parties either at the instructor's house, usually at the instructor's house, sometimes in one of the trainee townhomes, but usually at the instructor's house. And they would have a female trainee who was also graduating, and they would make sure she got plenty drunk. Sometimes that included roofies, date rape drugs, and then push her under like a circular table, or a table where like 3 or 4 guys are sitting with their pants off, exposed, and she's trapped under there, and she's forced to give blowjobs to the agents. It's a drinking game for them, and the first who smiles has to drink. And then by the time they're done with her and she's been abused enough and she's probably passed out, then sometimes they gang rape her. And at first, my classmate who I became really close with, Karen, she's deceased now. She was the only other woman to make it through the academy with me. She was like, oh, we're both like, get the hell out of here. Because it just sounds ridiculous. But they kept swearing, and then we heard more and more about it. And what would happen was the woman that this was done to would be gone the next morning. So yes, they're graduating, but they still have like a day or 2 before they get all their gear and their guns and their belts and all that, and get kicked out the door to go see their parents one last time or whatever, and then go out to their duty station, wherever that may be. And these are women that have supposedly, just graduated and all of a sudden they pack up their shit and quit the Border Patrol. After 4 months, at the time the academy back then was 4 months, after 4 months of all this, you just up and quit all this? And nobody would talk about it. Then they also told us about, that if your instructor asks you out and you don't go out with them, if they ask you for sex and you don't put out for sex, they'll fire you on your Spanish boards. And the Spanish boards they're not difficult. They don't teach you that much Spanish, but they have a subjective quality to it that allows them, because some parts of it are oral, and so that allows them to then judge you. I have seen people from Puerto Rico who speak Spanish as their first language fail. And I have seen people like me from Alabama or Louisiana who cannot roll their R's and don't know that much Spanish, pass. And so it's a very subjective type of test. And then I've also seen women fail who have complained about the sexual advances of their instructors and their classmates fail their physical training by less than 1 second, which is what they tried to do to me. So there are avenues and ways in which they get rid of women who complain. And they specifically told us, the women said they won't let you call the cops, the outside cops. Now, our instructors did mention to us the first night, if there's any fights, any arguments between y'all because you're living together, you're going through a lot of stress, we don't call the outside cops. We don't call the Brunswick cops. Or Glenn County Sheriffs. You call us and we'll settle it. And I mean, honestly, at the time, you're not thinking, well, if I'm raped, then who do I call? I mean, you just are like, yeah, I can see us getting into arguments, especially the men, because they're working together and living together and they're under stress and this and that. So yeah, whatever. And so I didn't really think of it like that. But essentially what the women were saying is that if you want to complain, they'll force you to file what's known as, we called it EEO, the letters EEO. It's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And they said they'll have you file EEO. But your EEO advisors are your male agents. So you have to go complain to your male agents about whatever sexual impropriety you think has been going on. And so we were kind of like, well, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And then, I think the feeling amongst most of us was just like, well, I'll just watch what I'm drinking, because there's a bar on campus, because most of us are over 21 and stuff. And it's where you can go watch, your football games on the weekends and stuff. And it just felt like, the warnings that we've all gotten our whole entire lives about being women, how you dress and how men will look at you and this kind of stuff. So that was my very first warning, is from the few females that were graduating ahead of us that week who came in and told us that. And then they made us promise that if we made it to the end, then we had to do the same for the other classes. And that's exactly what Karen and I did. So, well, I mean, like I said, we really thought that, I mean, let's be honest, we're all raised in the same rape culture in this country. So I'm going in with the same kind of attitude that, frankly, a lot of my male classmates are going in with. It, it's this he said, she said kind of moment and this and that. And I really had no experience, honestly, with sexual assault and rape, and certainly not systemic sexual assault and rape. And so, honestly, I just thought, I'm just going to prove myself. I'm educated. Most of the women here are not educated. Most of them barely had a high school diploma, to be honest with you. So I kind of was a little bit different anyhow. And then also, I knew then I was gay, so I had a lot to hide. So I'm just kind of like, I've always had to be careful. And it just seemed kind of ridiculous that in 1995, there was this kind of culture going on in a federal agency. And it just like almost like my naive young white Alabama girl brain couldn't conceptualize that. And so my thought was, I'll just be really careful. I mean, surely we're on a federal law enforcement training center base. I mean, really, these guys all want to be federal agents. So it's just kind of like, I know people are like, well, you should have gotten out of there right away. And it's like, what? Well, where am I going to go? Back to the abuse of my home and stuff? No, this is my one chance to get to California, to really make something of myself, to start my life, to get away from the abuse and get away from my family. And frankly, that's the way Karen was. Karen was there. She was, I want to say the age limit then, because you have to be able to get 20 years in by the time they had the mandatory retirement age at 54 back then. She was 34. So she had to get this job, or she wasn't going to be able to get away from her abusive Marine husband out here in California who was beating her, and be able to take care of her 3 sons. The Border Patrol calls us the fierce 5%. The only reason why we're the fierce 5% is because we're the 5% who are desperate enough and have to put up with the sexual abuse in order to get through the academy, in order to start our lives and protect our children and have a life for ourselves. That's what makes us the fierce 5%. I remember sitting in that meeting with her, and she is very Southern. I mean, she's from North Carolina, and I was born in Winston-Salem, but we only lived there like 6 months, and I mostly grew up in Alabama, so my accent's a little bit different, but my accent isn't as thick as most Southerners. But man, she was really tall and lanky, had 3 kids, a lot of sun damage, bleach blonde hair. And so we clicked because we're from the same area. Some of the other girls, they were Latinas, and they were from like Southern California, Arizona. And something about Karen and I just clicked. And we were very brash. We said what was on our mind. Weren't afraid to curse. Both tomboys and this and that. And we just got along from the get-go. So she actually lived in the townhome next to mine with all the other female Border Patrol agents from our class. So I was the only one that ended up, the odd one out, being next door in the immigration inspector's class. But she was a tough-ass woman. And that's what it takes to be a Border Patrol agent. And she was desperate, and that's what it takes to be a Border Patrol agent. Her and I had each other's backs. It took a little bit, but a couple of weeks, but after a couple of weeks, we were like sisters. We had one woman, I want to say, her name was Martha, and she struck everybody as older. She was very, very small, very short, Latina. Seemed more like she would fit more in an academic world, very quiet, and everybody assumed she was a lesbian. I could pass for straight back then, so nobody had any idea that I was gay. And then there was another woman who was a white woman, and I cannot remember her. Christy, I think, maybe was her name. And she was tall, like Karen. So I'm like barely 5'6". Karen was probably 5'7", 5'8". And she was too heavy. So was Nanette. Nanette was there, and she was too heavy. Nanette ended up failing her physical training. All the women ended up getting hurt, failing their physical training because of the obstacle course. The obstacle course is all upper body strength, and it's used to weed women out. And there was another Latina, and I can see her face, but I can't remember her name. We just didn't talk about it. And I remember Martha and Karen were actually roommates, and Martha would always say that the men were disgusting. And because they were just so weird. It's so weird if you've never been in a group of men in this kind of setting and trained with them. They do things like they snort up snot and boogers into their mouth and draw it into their mouth and try and spit it on you. I mean, it's just stupid shit that they do. They're like, and they just do this all the time. And you're like, or they would come near you and fart on you all the time. and then laugh about it. That's how childish it was. It was just ridiculous. And then all the sexual comments, oh, look at you in that uniform, and blah 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 blah. But the migrants won't run from you, and this and that. And I think she was further along in her in her journey as a woman, and she ended up leaving because she just could not stand the sexual harassment and what was going on. And also she was a Latina, and I think it affected her greatly, some of the language that was being used. These little things that they do towards women when you first fail your PT test, which a lot of people do, even men do, they're like, see, that's why you shouldn't be in the Border Patrol, And so basically, I mean, the men are told from the get-go, whereas the women have this secret meeting that nobody knows about that we had in our rooms at night. And the men have a meeting with the all male instructing staff where they literally tell them, and I know this from my classmate, literally tell them the women don't belong there. And if you are dating one of the women, be careful if you ask one of them out, because if they're failing in their PT, and they will fail their PT because no woman can pass our PT, that's how good we are. We only pass them if they threaten to file sexual complaints against us. So those are fake. So just be careful. They might put out fake allegations. And when I was first told this, I'm like, who is doing fake allegations? Why would anybody do a fake allegation? I've never heard. Why would you say, oh, I've been sexually assaulted, and just make it up and hope that they pass you? But the truth is no woman's ever passed the Border Patrol Academy just because she's filed an EEO complaint. And what I realized after time and having time away from it and seeing what other women had gone through, is that what they're doing is they're setting up the men to have their excuses as to why the women are filing sexual assault complaints. So when a woman does file a sexual assault complaint because she has been sexually assaulted by either an instructor or a classmate, their number one excuse is, well, I heard she's doing real bad on PT. And she's had to do this, and that's why. And so it's an excuse that you will find the male instructor, EEO advisors using in their forms, where they'll say, well, she was doing really bad in her PT, and there's a rumor in the females that if they file EEO then in fake complaints, then we'll pass them and they'll get their jobs. They literally set them up with that excuse from like day 1 or 2. And that's still done today. They do it more in private than in the classroom setting like they did in my day, but that's still being done today. Women do not belong in the Border Patrol, and the women that are in the Border Patrol are there to satisfy our sexual needs and take care of us. That is their job. And they also tell the men that the sexual harassment that female agents must endure is part of being one of the fierce 5%. They just have to deal with it. That's their struggles to overcome. And that's how they are deemed to hack it. So the Border Patrol motto is honor first. And what everybody thinks that means is honor to the Constitution, honor to the laws of the United States government. But the truth is, it means honor to the United States Border Patrol. It means we're family, we're a green family. We know everything that everybody does. And it kind of conditions you to recognize that you're constantly being watched by your fellow agents. And so we knew that they were watching everything that we did. And then we started hearing that honor first actually meant on her first, is how the men say it. And then we understood that when we came through those academy doors for the first time, I think both Karen and I and the other women and the men were like entering this agency thinking, honor first and everything that they teach us and this and that. And, for me at least, I speak to my feelings of I'm going to serve my country like my grandfather did in World War II. I'm going to protect the nation from people trying to come in between the ports of entry, and from what we're being told, it's mostly drug dealers or, sex traffickers and this and that. And now I look back on it and it's like, I look at my 24-year-old young self and I had no idea, like, I'm walking into this culture that not only accepts the sexual assault of female agents, it encourages it. And so we started to I think Karen and I started to get closer and realize we're the only ones we can trust. And so our weekend stopped becoming going out with, some of our male classmates and this and that, and ended up being mostly her and I, like going out to St. Simon's Beach and doing long runs in the rain and stuff like that, and just spending more time together and trying to stay away from our male classmates. Yeah, and I mean, I think so. We had different reactions towards it. Karen, being older and having zero fucks to give at her age and with what she was going through, I remember in her physical training class, Karen had really bad menstrual cycles, like very, very heavy menstrual cycles. And she would literally have to change every hour. I mean, it was so bad. She really needed to get some help with that and get under control, but she's trying to get through this academy. And in PT, physical training, her instructor, all male agents, were like, she would say, "Can I go to the restroom?" They're outside running around the track or whatever. And they would say, "No, if you got to pee, you pee outdoors like the guys do." And she's like, "I'm on my period, And they would say, "Well, it doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah." And I think they thought she was just like, I would imagine men don't understand menstrual cycles, so they wouldn't allow her to go. And so she eventually starts bleeding so bad that it's coming down her legs. I mean, that's how much. And then the guys are grossed out and they're like, "Yeah, go in there and change clothes." And she's like, "No, no, I'm just like you guys. I'm staying out here. I'm injured, but I'm going to stay." And so that's the way Karen would handle it. And for me, I kind of more tried to stay. I tried to stay to myself, and I was just there to get a job and to study, and I mostly tried to hang out with my immigration inspector housemates and their classmates, because it was a different vibe in the immigration inspectors and in customs. They didn't have not to say that they don't have their issues and their problems, but they just weren't as violent and abusive as the Border Patrol men, and their instructors were not as violent and abusive as our instructors and stuff. So I tended to hang out with them, and then I also ended up dating and seeing a woman who was in the academy for the park police. And their instructors were incredibly professional and had actually asked me to join the park police, said I would be a good fit for them. And I was kind of like, it took me so long to get hired by the Border Patrol. And I'm like, I just want to make it through this. How could it be any different? Blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, I just need to get through this and get out to my station, And So, yeah, you're under a lot of stress, but it's supposed to be stressful, right?